welcome to my book review. The book that I will be reviewing is called Thinking About Video Games, and it's by David Heinemann. So, what is this book all about? So through a series of interviews conducted from 2012 to 2013, uh, this book is trying to combine various kinds of expertise about video games, and it essentially interviews people with various backgrounds who are knowledgeable about the fields of video game and the video game industry in general. So this includes well-known figures from video game history, authors, editors, scholars, and so on. And the idea of the book is to bring together the people who care about video games, but also they think about video games from different perspectives. And so the idea of the book is to bring all these different perspectives together to sort of have a discussion. A scholar might have a different perspective about video games than a developer does, and so on. And so in this book, the author talks about the fact that in the early days when video games were fairly new, there used to be much more cross collaboration between the different silos in the video game industry. And so, for example, therefore, nowadays developers are only talking to game developers and scholars to scholars, whereas back in the day, the author notes that the cross collaboration used to be way more. And so, does video game history matter? So in this section of the book, it talks about video game history, and so there are sort of three approaches to or three categories to game history. And the first category is popular history, and this really has to do with the published works that appeal mainly to gamers. And so these are sort of publications that relate to a specific game series or platform that the gamers might be interested in. And a good example of this is Zap, The Rise and Fall of Atari by Scott Cohen. So this is an example of popular history of video games. And another category is the video game industry history. So this is essentially where the video game industry itself has created its own specific whether it's game re-releases or re-releases of popular games, or it creates its own publications to essentially tell their story through their own lens. So to tell their history through their own lens. And the third type of history is academic history, and this mainly relates to the published works of scholars and academics, again, through the lens in which they are seeing gaming. The next section of the book talked about games and the economy. So this is the second part of the book, and the term video game economy can refer to many things that are tied to the popularity of a video game itself. So whether it's books, magazines, streaming services, and so on. And so video game economy, it might also refer to designed in-game systems such as microtransactions, or another example is the accumulation of experience points, whereby users can use those experience points to buy virtual items and so on. And so in this section of the book, the author also talks a little bit about how there is a lot of change and a lot of employee turnover in the video game industry in general, and the industry has undergone significant periods of success and failure, which essentially creates this volatility where um, there is employee turnover in the industry. And the next section of the book talks about games and culture. And it highlights essentially what it means to consider video games as a cultural experience. A large part of this section of the book is focused on actually controversy in gaming and gaming cultures, which was made it a very interesting read. Um, the book describes the laws that were put in place uh, in the 1970s and 80s to prevent children from entering arcades due to the perceived effects of gaming violence back then. And so they expressed concerns about their children's long-term psychological damage due to the effects of gaming. And so they feared that their children would become hostile and violent because of the exposure to video games. And therefore, many anti-arcade laws were passed in the 1970s and 80s. And yeah, so in the book also the author mentions that in the 90s, the debate actually shifted from restricting physical access to arcades for kids, um, and it shifted to the restriction surrounding video game consoles uh, played in the home. And so um, the video game consoles were much more popular in the home, or were starting to gain popularity in the home then. And this is when the sort of the debate um, shifted from restricting access to arcades and more so into, oh, what are the types of violent video games that kids can play in their own home? And therefore, the Entertainment Software Ratings Board was eventually formed to rate games based on objectionable content. And this, obviously, it continues to this day as well. And nowadays, public controversy around video games focuses on particular franchises that may offend certain people, and this is mainly through because of the themes of sex and violence in video games. And some final thoughts. I thought this was a fascinating read. It was very, very interesting to see the different people that were interviewed. There were many people that were very successful in the video game industry, and it brought many different people from the world of gaming in order to get those different perspectives. And I thought the book did that very well. And that is my book review. Thank you.